Good evening, everyone. We are going to call tonight's meeting to order. We're going to start with an approval of the agenda. There's a recommendation in the agenda that the agenda and any addendums for the December 5th, 2023 Council Operating Budget meeting be approved. The one thing before I ask for a motion is I am going to ask, like we did last night, to move question period up after council questions, if that's okay with everybody. So with that change, can we go ahead and approve the agenda? Councillor Andrews and Councillor Prendergast, any questions or comments? All in favor? And that is carried unanimously. Any disclosures of direct or indirect pecuniary interest tonight? And seeing none, we had no closed meeting. And next we will rise, if you're able, for the singing of our national anthem, please.
O Canada, our home and native land, true patriot love in all of us command. With glowing hearts we see thee rise, the true north strong and free. From far and wide, O Canada, we stand on guard for thee. God keep our land glorious and free. O Canada, we stand on guard for thee. O Canada, we stand on guard for thee.
We would like to acknowledge the treaty lands and territory of the Williams Treaty Nation and the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. We also recognize that Dufferin County is the traditional territory of the Wendat and the Haudenosaunee and is home to many Indigenous people today. Tonight's meeting is being aired on public television and or streamed live and may be taped for later public broadcast or webcast. Your name is part of the public record and will be included in the minutes of tonight's meeting. Any member of the public connecting via telephone is reminded to press *6 to mute and unmute. Please remain muted until the chair requests comments or questions from the public. We do have no rise in reports or adoptions of minutes of previous council meetings. So as with last night, we will start by presentations from staff, and I will turn the floor over to our CAO, David Smith.
Great. Thank you very much, Mayor Post. I appreciate it. Good evening, everybody. It's not Monday, but it is a budget night, so that pretty well makes up for it. Staff are delighted to be here to advance the operating budget this evening. Before we begin, I wanted to take a moment and thank Council for your engagement last night as the capital budget was considered and approved. We appreciated your questions and your decisions. I wanted to repeat one of the things that I said last night before I move into new comments, but I think it's worthy to keep out in the front of discussions that we speak about in terms of taxes. And again, repeating from last night, of every tax dollar a resident pays in Ontario, tax of any kind, 47 cents goes to the federal government, 44 cents goes to the province, and only 9 cents comes to the municipal government. Yet we are responsible for more than half of the infrastructure in Ontario. If taxes are too high, more work needs to be done at the federal and provincial levels. Our total budget calls for a 4.5% tax increase. Our community needs that level of investment at minimum. Here is what other communities are doing today. Guelph, 6.9%, 6.95% plus approved. Shelburne, 8.72% approved. Centre Wellington, 8.54. New Tecumseh, 7.83. Erin, 5. Wasaga Beach, 5.6. Collingwood, 3.73. And one near and dear to my heart, Port Hope, 7.74. No community is talking in the 2s. Of the list, only one is talking in the high 3s. We're in the 4s, and 7 of those 8 mentioned are in the 5 to 9% range. Times are different from what they were. Why is it this? Each community is different. But if you ask me about themes,
Tell us about the themes.
Thank you. Sharp, quick, thank you. There's no new dollars. Growth has come to a screeching halt across the province, and that is impacting us in our community. With no new development or little development, there's no new money coming to the coffers. Extreme inflation in things that municipalities buy, making up for lost time and lost opportunities. And that's true for us. When we look at municipalities in the infrastructure deficit, we're finding that we need to make up time, and service level increases. That is true for us as well. The vast majority of this budget is status quo. In fact, the presentation is kind of routine, kind of boring, if I can say that. I think you'll see that. You're going to hear a lot about reallocation, maybe something about infrastructure and fuel, but it's not a budget that is advancing a lot of new initiatives. It's pretty sparse and pretty bare bones. As I said last night, we're not bringing a budget in high, expecting it to be cut and ending up where we need to be. We're bringing in a budget that is reasonable and responsible. If council does not support all of the requests, we strongly encourage you to maintain the funding envelope for other priorities. Our reserves are underfunded and our capital program is always short. Patrick, our treasurer, will show a slide about what could be, and I would ask that when you see it, you consider how your decisions at budget each year impact our future. He will also speak about the OPP funding, but the reality is the money has already been pretty well spoken for long before tonight. We've been paying in the interim with one-time funding sources, a below inflation average annual increase of 1.7% over the past number of years had to be paid for somehow. The OPP savings allows us to break free from this unsustainable model. One-time funding should be used for one-time expenses only. It got us to where we needed to be, and now we have the opportunity to move somewhere better. We are keen to get a budget approved and to get on with the work. This process consumes a ton of staff resources, and the sooner we can focus on implementation, the better. Having stability is good for financial planning, for our residents, for our businesses, and for our work. We have an extremely talented finance team. Reserve strategy, debt strategy, long-range financial plan, asset management plans, etc., will help us continue to improve and refine our financial strategy. Finally, the longer-term projection of a 4% annual increase are just that. They're projections. With council support, we have lots of ideas on how to mitigate those preliminary numbers. We will work with you, our council, and our community to find the right spot for our community going forward. My thanks once again to Patrick, Mandeep, Rebecca, Rocky, and my colleagues on the senior leadership team, and of course, our colleagues with clerks and IT that are here tonight supporting us. Thank you, Mayor. I'll turn it over to Mr. Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Good evening, Mayor Post, council, staff, members of the public. Welcome to tonight's budget discussion. Tonight we'll be focusing on the proposed operating budget. As mentioned last evening, we had some fruitful conversations and arrived at what is, I consider, a robust capital program that's strategically aligned with the priorities of council and the community. Staff took the time to outline and justify a number of the critical initiatives being implemented in the coming year. In total, the program includes $3.5 million of capital levy allocations, which will grow by inflationary adjustments over the life of the forecast. But tonight we shift our focus to operating costs and revenues that will allow staff to deliver the day-to-day services the community expects. So again, similar to last night, just a brief agenda. I want to get right into the bottom line, the net levy requirement that we're seeking within this budget. I'll overview a few of the budget pressures and some contextual information. I'll do a quick slide or an overview of service level changes, which are outlined further within the agenda in the staff report section. And then we'll move into summaries of some of the key drivers and impacts across all the service areas. Following that, one last consolidated budget overview before putting forward the recommendation and opening it up for questions. So as has been out there since November 27th, the total net levy requirement for 2024 has been posted at $41.7 million. This equates to a 4.5% levy increase, generating close to $1.8 million in additional funding for services and capital programs across the town. From a household impact, this would equate to approximately $145 annually or $12 monthly. This is based on the average annual assessment around the $380,000 mark. So key budget pressures remain from the start of the budget process right through. Inflation obviously still is in place. The latest figure, October CPI, was at 3.1%. We don't have to get into municipal costs and how they relate to CPI, but inflation is ever present. Staffing resources, as mentioned, there's service level requests that are included within the proposed budget this evening. They've been incorporated within the corporate allocations division of this budget and align with some of the reporting that was brought forward from Blackline at previous meetings. External government funding is not increasing. It's dropping in most areas, forcing us to rely on own source revenues. That's why a lot of the recalibration efforts that have been made to put funding in place to support operating and capital programs are within this budget. And finally, service level expectations, which we hear every day at the staff level, and you most definitely hear at the council level, growing expectations throughout the community without resources growing at the same level creates a difficult and challenging situation. So for historical context, and this was mentioned last night, the town's levy adjustments over the past 5 years have generally been below the level of inflation. And the next slide will outline further the impact that those decisions have had on the net levy that's available at this time to support ongoing costs. So as this graphic shows, on average, levy adjustments in the town have been around the 1.7% mark. That's the gray line. The gold line up above would be the average inflation levels over that same time period, which are above 3%. The next slide, which I referenced, is where we would be as a town had CPI been followed over that same time period. So in this, the gold bars are showing the actual levy adjustments annually from 2019 through 2023. The blue section would be if the inflation measure CPI was used during the same time period. So the final column does indicate the aggregate levy increase over the past 5 years. So the approach taken, which again I mentioned last night, was not a poor approach or not the wrong practice. It was what needed to be done during that period of time to keep taxes at a reasonable amount while we awaited savings from OPP. But it did leave a $3.2 million variance. So this slide does indicate had the town stuck with inflation as the driving force for levy increases, there would be $3.2 million in additional funding available annually to support programs and services. This slide we've shared throughout the process just to give the contextual information that every 1% raises approximately $400,000 in new funding and impacts the average property owner by $32. So looking at, before we hand it over to each of the departments, how the expenditures, net expenditures are distributed across all service areas. You can see at the top are critical emergency services, OPP and fire. The majority of the budget lands in those service areas and then works its way down with smaller percentages throughout. But in all that's the spread of where tax dollars are going within the town. When we speak of new costs, so I think during the tabling of the budget, we talked about the difference between the base budget and the proposed budget. So the proposed budget factors in a number of items. One key one is service level changes. This slide outlines what's in the consent agenda reports tonight, which are each of the staffing positions that are being requested as a need, a critical need for 2024 and the impact of each of those positions. So this goes from the fire training officer, supervisor of licensing and bylaw enforcement, a makerspace specialist, a project manager in roads, fleet supervisor, and then the small green piece is additional part-time staffing costs to deal with crossing guards. Absent from this graph are the waterworks operator and financial analyst position, which have zero impact on the levy. So as we get into each of the service areas, I can begin with outlining where a big piece of the budget and the discussion will probably revolve around, which is within administration, corporate allocations, and notably the OPP. So for each service area, you'll see the same slide presented tonight, which is going to have the approved budget from 2023 in orange and the proposed budget for 2024 in blue. So as you can see, there aren't really material drivers within council and committees. The adjustments are minor in nature. When you do look at administration, just to be clear, that's not a significant increase in staffing costs within the administration. That's a reallocation. This is us moving all of the GMs, the CAO, and executive assistants all into one centralized location. The big piece, the big material driver across these service areas is going to come in our recalibration efforts, which we'll get into again this evening, and the significant savings from the OPP billing transition. So one key piece that's come up, it came up last year during the budget, and I wanted to make sure we were ahead of it. And this presentation deals with ORDC investment income. So just from a historical perspective, the proceeds of approximately $30 million have not been spent. They've been invested into 5 high interest yielding GICs. The interest earned on those GICs based on board direction is transferred to the town to repay an outstanding loan from the town to the ORDC. The interest earned in 2024 based on our GICs will be just under $1 million, $971,000, bringing that loan balance down to just over $8 million. So it's critical to note on here that the principal amount of the proceeds will remain with the ORDC pending the outcomes of public consultation, which are anticipated to occur in 2024. The shift in this versus last year's budget did include $1.24 million in interest earned. You'll recall from last year, it carried interest earned from a portion of 2022 and 2023, which is an inflated or non-sustainable revenue amount. We're adjusting it back down to the expected or the guaranteed interest since the GICs of $971,000 in this year's budget. With regard to the OPP contract, as stated many times, we've talked about $4 million many times, and there will be another presentation coming up next Monday from the OPP that'll probably discuss it in more detail. This slide gives a good summary of the gold bar indicates back when it was the Orangeville Police Service, the cost of that service. The 3-year transition period where you can see steady, modest increases over the 3 years, and then the anticipated drop, which is that green bar in 2024, as expected. At the conclusion of the budget presentation, after each department's given their overviews, I can sum up the recalibration efforts and the impact of OPP in a more a fulsome fashion. But for now, I'll hand it over to Acting GM Chris Moore for some highlights from the corporate services operating budget.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kelly. Madam Mayor and Council, pleased to be here to talk about the corporate services budget. I'm going to go division by division, just talk about some of the key points. I just want to remind us, and there's some great information in the budget book, but finance, all the great work that do, customer service, over 21,000 calls from citizens in the year, 8,500 invoices processed, 21,000 tax bills. The budget, audit processes, not just taxation and billing, but also strategic financial management. The changes to their budget, it's an increase of 174,000, and that is related to the GM and EA reallocation that Mr. Kelly spoke about, But we've also, through the budget process, centralized all of the customer service staff budget into finance, so it's all in one place. Many years ago, when I started in municipal government, I realized that it's so important to understand municipal finance. And the first time I was a cost center manager, I learned that connection between accountability and responsibility. So I'm happy to see these dollars centralized here, because then the manager can be responsible in the oversight for that. So the next division just want to talk about is clerks. Now they've seen a decrease in 105,000, mostly because of the GM, and there was a customer service reallocation from there to finance as well. And I was going to say I don't have to tell you what the clerks do, but I will anyways. Besides the 87 meetings that they managed throughout the year, they've processed 222 marriage licenses, 306 burial permits, 813 bylaw complaints, and 3,288 parking tickets, and so much more. Then to talk a bit about bylaw, there was a decrease in their budget of 32,000, again through reallocation, some rebalancing there, and talk about the bylaw and some of the work that they've done as well. Now onto IT, there's an increase of 308,000. That is a combination of the 140,000 that we moved into IT of the interdepartmental charges. So each of the other departments and divisions have seen a reduction, again, along the principle of putting that money in one place so that the leadership can be responsible. And then there was it's about 175,000 in software agreements. I've spoken to council earlier this year about some of the things that we've been doing in IT to right size it and get things on track, and some of the commitments that were made before. This is just having the budget in place to be able to align with the contractual agreements that were there. IT, I've probably spent most of my career trying to describe IT to people, so I'm going to try. Internally, they've to date, which was around September, responded to over 1,100 work orders. So that's staff and council requesting, hey, my computer's not working, I need this help. We have on average monthly about 3,500 Wi-Fi connections on our public Wi-Fi. So that is just a great service that is provided to the public when they're in any of our buildings or town hall. 2,400 plus calls on our telephone system. And then our network, so all of the data that travels on our network in a week is the equivalent of 350 billion printed pages of information. I was trying to figure out how does that stretch to the moon? I don't know. But it's just a lot of information that travels as we run our business and operation, and as we interact with the public and business partners and other municipalities. The HR budget reduction there of just over 6,000, again, through the GM reallocation. HR, some of their key measures over the year, 115 recruits and new hires through a combination of full-time, part-time, and volunteer firefighters. And there's been an estimate of 685 hours of training for staff internally. And the other number that jumps out at me, and if you look at the health and safety metrics, they've continued to go down over the years, and it's the lowest it's been for a number of years. And I think that speaks to the training that's been done, but also just the awareness of the importance of health and safety. And since David's been here, every meeting that everybody has, we always have a safety talk. So that's extremely important for everybody, but I think a really great metric from HR. And then the final division, communications, reduction of 16,000, again, related to the GM reallocation. Some interesting metrics from them in terms of increased engagement on Facebook and LinkedIn and Instagram and even Twitter. And they've had more of a focus this year on handling emergency calls and providing that information out. And coordinating the AODA. We're still trying to get to 100%, but we're actually at 93% on our website right now. So we're almost there. And then the other most recent one, the holiday video, I have to mention that because when I watched it, it was one of those things that just made me feel good. And it was a great message, and I felt it was very inclusive. And we shared it on LinkedIn, and then I jumped on and shared it with my contacts on LinkedIn. And I said, this is where you want to be, a place where people are this way with each other. So that is the budget for corporate services, a net increase of 321,000 over the divisions. And most of that is through the reallocation and the recalibration, and then some kind of leveling up on some of our IT commitments. So I will now pass it over to Ms. Savage tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Mayor, members of council, good evening. Welcome back. So we're going to talk about some highlights within the 5 divisions of the Community Services Department. Fire, as Treasurer Kelly had alluded to, a lot of these divisions were impacted by the GM and EA compensation reallocations and by interdepartmental costs. So I'm just going to go into high-level details about some of the other stuff that are found within, that are material drivers within the budget. In fire, there was a decrease in lease payments due to the enterprise fleet management agreement. So some of those vehicles will be subjected to that type of agreement. There is an increase in annual dispatch agreement. This includes upgrades to our next gen 911 dispatching units. Library services. Recently, the Orangeville Public Library passed a fine-free policy, which would remove overdue fines on certain items. So you'll see that there is less fines being collected this year. Crossing guards, there were a couple of minor impacts. There was an increase to materials and supplies to better support recruitment and retention and to promote education campaigns and safety awareness. I know as we returned to school, we had a lot of chat about crossing guards and the safety of crossing guards, especially up over at the Rolling Hills subdivision. So we're going to continue to support those efforts administratively. And as well, this budget now formally recognizes the high level of traveling that the supervisor of crossing guards is required to do from site to site. So now it includes mileage for that staff member, which it had not done in the past. Facilities is status quo, minimal increases across the board, except for rate hikes in gas, insurance, and utilities, which was a common theme among most of the facilities. Parks, we have an increase to maintenance and repairs. That's just due to aging equipment. You could see that there was also replacements within the capital budget. There are increased operating costs to support the ongoing preventative maintenance and responsive maintenance to those pieces of equipment. And in recreation events, there was the removal of the federal student grants. So we did receive wage subsidy in most departments that hired students. We used to receive a federal grant for a wage subsidy, approximately $2. That's no longer available. I had heard that a lot of that, those wage subsidies were going to trades, students who were in the trades. So municipalities are no longer receiving that, which will impact our compensation lines. But what it does do is it frees up to hire students and others that are available throughout the summer months who may be qualified, let's say, for a more technical position in parks. Also, additional materials and supplies, specifically for growing the camp and aquatic programs. We anticipate there will be increased participation in Alder Pool when it opens up. And I will now pass it over to Mr. Koselleck.
Thanks, Heather. Good evening, Mayor and members of council. I wanted to give a quick overview of the infrastructure service budget highlights. Infrastructure services we have 5 divisions, but they all work closely together with our planning. We do Planning for applications, and in 2023, we did 3 plans of subdivision, 6 official plan amendments, 3 zoning amendments, 11 site plan applications, 3 condominium applications, and number of severances. So with those that go through our building department, we have building permit issues, but they all drive on the roads, they use the water and wastewater. So as part of it, some of the work we see, such as the resurfacing of Broadway out front and other construction projects, but we were also able to complete the rehabilitation of the Dungeon water reservoir near the hospital, one of those ones that's out of sight, but we were able to do that work. So in our budget this year, as CAO Smith mentioned, there wasn't too much of a change. With our planning, there's a small increase in the planning, just as part of the compensation and the transfer to reserves. With our capital works, there's no real material changes on that number also. Public works, we do have a small increase. Part of it's the sanding and salting or fuel costs. But there's a few things we've put in for service level changes for public works. One, we talked a little bit about sidewalks yesterday. So we're looking at increasing our sidewalk repair program to be able to get all the deficiencies completed in the next few years and have a very proactive program. So that's one of the items that was put forward. And also we're looking at doing a stormwater flushing program. The stormwater sewers in town haven't been flushed, I don't think ever. So over the next 4 years, we're going to implement a program so we flush all the storm sewers. That way we can ensure the condition of the sewers, also the flow rates, and make sure there's no debris. I've seen it in other areas where it's surprising you have some large debris in there that blocks flows, or you even have utilities drill through your sewers. So this is a good way to proactively maintain our assets. And then when we're looking at our road programs, we know if the sewers need to be repaired, replaced, or other work to be done. And just with the sewers too, we're looking at doing a manhole maintenance program as part of our public works. I guess we did an inspection of the manholes, and there's about almost 1,100 manholes that are deficient, that need repairs, or they have significant leaking issues. So what we're looking at doing is starting a program this year that will go out and proactively do probably 80 or 100 manholes per year to be able to tackle some of the worst ones that are, whether it's condition or water infiltrating into the systems. Our cemetery, not many people know that the town operates the municipal cemetery at Greenwood, but there's not much of a change on that. And also we have transit, so there's not too much of a change on that also. We also have the water and wastewater. And you can see the water program is increasing a little bit. With that, we have a few new programs also we're looking at introducing. We want to go with iPads and provide electronic logbooks. Currently, all the operators carry a paper book around, write it all down. At the end of the year or years, we get a big stack of paper books. What we want to try and do is do electronic. So that way, if you're out somewhere, you can look at the notes. Right now, if you're at a different location, you can't look at the logbook at, say, well 5. This way, if it's all electronic, we get a permanent record. It's quicker, retention's better, and I think it'll work out a lot better for everybody. And one of the things we're looking at introducing too with the waterworks is a leak detection program. The town hasn't done it for quite a few years. And what we want to try and do is try and account for some of the unaccounted water. So with this, you'd go out when it's quiet more at nighttime, listen for some of the areas where there's potential leaks. We can identify them and either repair or replace sections of pipe to be able to get rid of any leaks that we do have. And as part of it too, we're looking at doing some sort of proactive pipe work rehabilitation at some of the wells. A lot of the wells are 15, 20 years old, and it's just proactively replacing some of the piping just before it fails or before we have issues. We want to go in, replace it, and ensure gaskets and pipes are fixed. And also we're looking at getting some improved water utility locate equipment. One of the things we have is when people do construction, they have to call out to do locates for it. Some of our piping was installed and they don't have what's called a tracer wire on it, which normally you can hook up and it's a metal wire that you can track it. So we're looking at getting a different system that can either track the water or on a place with a tracker system. So that way it'll make it a little bit quicker, more accurate for staff, less risk for any infrastructure getting hit too. So it'll be a good proactive program for us. There's a few small increases in those. Just going to mention our building doesn't show any significant change, but we are looking at our building rates compared to our neighbors, including the county, and we're looking at bringing a new rate study back early in 2024. So that'll be something coming back to council later. And that sums up most of the infrastructure services changes.
Thank you, Mr. Koselleck, and peers across the way again for your overview of operations this evening. So the town does undertake a multi-year operating forecast. Again, I'm reminding you tonight we're seeking approval of the proposed 2024 budget and just endorsement of that forecast. There's a number of driving factors within that will change over the years as we get some of the plans in place regarding debt management, reserve fund strategies, looking at our fees and charges, as was mentioned a couple times over there, that can impact the outer years. So as Mr. Smith noted, where we're looking at in the 4% range, 3.6 to 4.2%, those will no doubt change in the coming years, but the forecast is there for your endorsement. So as noted earlier, I did say I would talk about, again, this recalibration of budget piece, but I felt this slide and graphic kind of sums it up quite well, where the OPP savings have been utilized. I'll preface it with saying there was dialogue last night regarding the OPS severance pieces, the payments of that, the line of credit. So I will clarify, I believe that Deputy Mayor Taylor was correct that we did have access to $20 million in a line of credit. So that's where the 20 million came from. As stated last night, we utilized 5 million of that line of credit for the past 3 years while we were waiting for this transition. We were paying interest only on that $5 million line of credit. In this year's budget, we begin paying down the principal portion. Principal and interest are adding up to around $630,000, I believe. But you'll watch on that table too, in debt, you'll see the 5 million slowly come down and be fully paid off by the year 2030. So I just wanted to clarify that for anyone watching this evening that might have that question. So with this graphic, the OPP savings obviously on the right are around $4 million, as we've noted, but the combination of those four key factors on the left are where those funds are moving within this budget. So last evening, thanks to council, the capital funding allocation and the allocation to capital reserves were approved. Those are the orange pieces. Tonight, as part of the operating budget, we do have a budget that's put forward that says we're gonna move away from utilizing rate stabilization reserves this year because we have the opportunity to do so. And we also need to adjust our investment income down, notably for the ORDC piece that I spoke about earlier, but also because we can't expect to be receiving yields at the rates we have been for the past several years. And with the capital spending that you've seen going forward and that's going to be coming forward early in the new year, the money that's sitting in our bank account earning interest isn't going to be at the level that it is. So adjusting investment income back down. The combination of those and then the recalibration term, the combination of those is approximately $3.85 million, or essentially all of the OPP savings. So just to wrap up before the recommendation, I thought it'd be good to take everyone on a little journey of where this budget process went. So we did start at the very left there. That's the 2023 budget. So our base budget, just under $40 million. The reason the first sections are in orange, that's what's been approved thus far. The transfer to capital, the transfer to reserves, and previously endorsed items. So those are items that throughout the calendar year, small items that council approved to move forward in 2024. That brought us to where we are this evening, which is just above $42 million in a levy requirement. I've just talked about the investment income adjustment, the rate stabilization adjustment. Those bring us up around $44 million. One-time allocations just above $44 million. And then a key spot here is where you see the graph flatten, and that's the reallocations piece. A lot of people focus on some big numbers that are within there. All of those big numbers net to $0. It's strictly moving funds to allocate them within the appropriate departments for better reflection of where costs are being derived from. Finally, towards the right-hand side, inflation is around $660,000 across the whole budget. And then the service level changes, which again are outlined within the reports this evening and have been outlined by my peers across the way, are that last piece that would take us to around a $46 million levy requirement. Then comes the significant drop of the OPP savings, which we were expecting. That brings us down to that level below $42 million at the bottom, and our net levy requirement that's put forward tonight. So the recommendation within the report and council or staff, are here recommending to council that the operating budget be approved as presented with a consolidated levy increase of 4.5%. Also that you approve the self-funded programs for building water and wastewater, and that ultimately you endorse the multi-year operating budget and long-term capital budget. So with that, I'll thank everyone from staff that's been involved in getting us to this point. Thank the leadership team, especially and particularly our CAO for his leadership throughout this process and support. But the biggest thanks obviously goes to my staff team in finance. Can't thank them enough for where we are tonight and for their assistance in bringing me on board and up to speed rather quickly with where the budget is. And I'm proud to bring that forward for your approval tonight. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kelly, and thank you to the leadership team again for giving very thorough presentations and setting council up for some good questions that are to come. Just went in regards to format, council. As we did last night, I think we should break it down into departments, starting with Mr. Moore. But I want to be clear that the reports that are listed under 12, so 12.1.1 right through to 12.1.8, ask those questions at the same time. So if you want to ask questions about any of the service level increases, the FTEs that are being proposed, now is the time to do it as well. So we will revisit those reports for approval later, but we want to open it up for questions first. So I will turn it to council. Who has questions to start?
Actually, Mayor, I'm sorry.
Yeah, Mr. Go ahead.
Break in here. Two things. Number one is it was very helpful last night when members of council had a question related to a specific item. If they could reference the page number, that lets us all focus in on there. And then I think the first series of questions can go to the treasurer for those corporate allocations in the first section of the presentation.
Perfect. Thank you for that clarity. So we will start with Mr. Kelly when it in regards to administration and corporate allocations. Was there any questions from council for Mr. Kelly? Councillor Andrews.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. And I apologize, I don't have the page number, Mr. Kelly, but it was focusing on the grants. And I noticed there's a grant line in 2024, literally across for a number of years, steady at 175. And I was just looking for some clarification on what would an example be of grants. You did highlight in your presentation the fact that there are reduced opportunities for grants that are coming or previously would be coming from different levels of government. But just for the sake of clarification, I saw this, continuum and just wanted to get some clarification.
Through you, Mayor Post, thanks for the question, Councillor Andrews. So that $175,000 grant is under the expense line. That's our community grant program, which is split with 90,000, maybe, 95,000, sorry, in the multi-year grant program and the remaining 80,000 in one-time grants. So as mentioned, I think a few meetings ago, it feels like we meet quite frequently right now, but we are reviewing a partnership opportunity with Headwaters Community in Action to administer that program. We're continuing throughout the forecast with the expectation that $175,000 would be made available annually.
Great, thank you for that clarification.
Thank you, Councillor Andrews. Any additional questions? Councillor Sherwood, go ahead.
Yep. Yes, Your Worship, thank you. That's small. Page 51. Under corporate allocations, of course, if we want to look at last year's approved budget and the proposed budget, it's going from 3.9 to 8.589, which seems like quite a blow. But down in your material drivers, you're very good at explaining where those have come out, as particularly those one-time that being reversed that you mentioned. But down where it says transfer to and from reserves and capital, can you help me clarify the 1.539 million? Is that in addition to the 3.5 million that we had already committed to go into reserves?
Yes, through you, Mayor Post. Thanks for the question, Councillor Sherwood. Yes, to be clear, that $1.5 million additional allocation is going directly into our capital reserves. The $3.5 million you were speaking about is directly into this year's program, $3.5 million right into 2024 capital. This $1.5 million is an additional allocation into our general capital reserves, which are used to fund the capital program over the long term. I believe we did talk at a previous meeting about the status of those reserve funds. If you were to look at where they're at right now, if everything went forward status quo as we're projecting, that general capital reserve fund would be at $90,000 within 3 years. So allocations such as this, that $1.5 million in additional funding towards it that we're doing through the recalibration effort is critical to the capital programs that are being put forward.
Yeah, Councillor Sherwood, go ahead.
So I just want to know how you come up with that figure. Like, what's the math?
Mr. Kelly?
Sure, that's a great question. So there's a lot of effort gets put into asset management planning in the town. There's going to be a significant level more effort put in through the next stage of the asset management plan. That asset management plan recognized already that we're $5 million behind annually in what we put into our reserve funds to sustain the capital program. This is what we felt was an appropriate amount to start in that process forward, knowing full well that with the update of the asset management plan in 2024, we're going to add in a significant number of additional assets through Ms. Savage's team and within fire services that are going to produce a gap as well. This is a first step forward to closing that infrastructure funding gap. So if you're asking for the specific math, we're trying to tackle a much larger infrastructure deficit, and this is a step forward to doing that.
Sir Sherwood? Yeah, go ahead.
And I just want to clarify that the $5.8 million surplus that we had in 2022 also is parked in our general reserves, correct?
Yeah, and thank
Brought in this budget at all.
No, and thank you again through you, Mayor Post. Thank you for, I love talking about reserve funds. You'll get to learn that rather quickly, but yeah, those surpluses also, when they occur, we can't predict them, are critical to sustaining our funding. Though that $5.8 million surplus is going into reserve funds, and we're still reaching a point where it's dropping lower. So putting that money away, not taking surplus, I've said this previously, using surpluses from previous years to fund current year operations is not an appropriate move. It's not sustainable whatsoever. You're going to have to find that money at some point in time, and those surpluses, if they're not going into capital, cause us more problems there.
Sir Stevens?
Thank you, Your Worship. Probably a really easy question. Why did we change the GM, like the compensations reallocations?
Mr. Kelly?
Sure. So this was before. I'm going to grab water first. Sorry. That was before my coming on board here, but in my previous roles, we would consolidate the administration costs within one service area so that it's quite an exercise to spread the cost of one individual over 6, 7, 8 divisions, proportion it out. We felt it's appropriate to house it within one location. You can see the full cost of the administration of the organization. So it's an effective way, much more effective way to see the costs where they flow from, and makes a more efficient reporting for us as well.
Does that answer your question? Do you have a follow-up? Are you sure? One thing that I would just add to that is that when you're looking at next budgets, it'll be easier to see where those lines are, because otherwise their salaries get lost in all of the other budget lines because you can't really see and pinpoint each of those chunks in each budget.
Yeah, and I guess what I'm having a hard time with is, like, are we ahead of the game, behind the game? Are we equal? Like, you know what I mean? Because we're taking it from different divisions and adding it into a different one. So I just want to make sure that we're not, nothing's being hidden in there that we're not seeing. Yes.
Yep, Mr. Kelly, go ahead.
Yep, through you, Mayor Post, I'd just reiterate from my presentation materials, those reallocations add up to $0. There's nothing hidden. We don't have a practice of hiding numbers anywhere within our budgets. One of the most fulsome budget documents that I've seen. Everything's there.
And I trust you. So I just wanted to make sure.
Mr. Smith, go ahead.
Yeah, I appreciate that comment. Our staff are highly professional. They have professional ethics. They are licensed to be accountants. So I have the utmost respect for their integrity. And Councillor, thanks for saying that as well.
Was there any additional questions for Mr. Kelly at this time? No? Okay. You're off the hot seat for a minute anyways. We'll probably call you back on. Don't worry. So we will turn it over next to Mr. Moore's division. Was there questions for the Corporate Services Department? Councillor Andrews.
Thank you, Your Worship. Mr. Moore, I have two. This is looking at two lines that exist, one on page 76, and this is pertaining to the IT service agreements. And could you just provide a little bit of a quick explanation on what that would include?
Mr. Moore, I'll turn it over to you.
Absolutely, yes. Thank you. And through you, Mayor Post, thank you for the question, Councillor. That would include, for example, we made some changes last year to our GIS software. Unfortunately, when we chose to change our license agreement, we didn't put the money in the budget to pay for all of it. So we made that decision. We also made commitments with other software companies, companies that provide consulting, aerial imagery, and we didn't have that money in the budget. So we were unfortunately making commitments, contractual commitments without the funds. So this is really just to address that. There's two parts to software agreements. One is the 84,455, which is related to inflationary impacts and other costs. And then the 91,538 are the pieces that we made commitments and didn't have the funds to pay for them.
Great, thank you. And my second question, you framed this beautifully with the Christmas greeting video, how the organization is a great place to be employed at. You know, it's reflective not only the members of council, but I found on page 89, and I probably can answer this question, but I'd like to just get your take on this. This is why the HR's PR, promotions, and events is up by 60.5%. And I know that it was referenced by all of our general managers. We have, of course, for example, in community services, a number of new summer students that would be joining in the summertime, maybe some, you know, as we would say, introduction and some training. But I'd just like to hear your take on that. Thank you.
Through you, Mayor Post, Councillor. This is where we have funds corporately for events across the organization. There really is not a lot of money in the other divisions and departments for those events. I guess the important thing, especially in the last year and a bit, is to create that sense of team and community. And you know, I've worked in a number of other municipalities and conservation authorities, and the sense of team here is very great. And Ms. Goen and her team do a really good job at making sure that people are connected. You can't do everything for everybody, but they are sensitive and inclusive. So that's really why there's an increase there.
I wanted to hear your take because, again, I was probably going to say something very similar. You know, good work environments recognize good people. And if it happens to be through recognition, through, you know, some activity, that really provides a cohesive team environment.
And the other thing that is really important, as you know, is attraction and retention. I've said it to the senior leadership team. I don't think we are becoming a place where people want to be. I think we have become a place where people want to be as an employer of choice. So.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Thank you, Councillor Andrews. Councillor Stevens, go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship. Sorry, kind of cough tonight. Must be contagious. Under 12.1.5, permanent full-time supervisor for bylaw, we're in what, 2 months into the contract? Just wondering why we want to make it full-time right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Through you, Mayor Post and Councillor. This has been a need for some time. Part of the challenge is the town clerk was effectively the supervisor of bylaw enforcement, which had an impact on their ability to do their work. And as well, we needed somebody who had the expertise in that area. We have the contract, we have the funds for the contract, but it was always our intention to put it in the budget. So from a timing perspective, that's how it ended up.
Thank you.
Any additional questions for Mr. Moore? Deputy Mayor?
I guess I'd just like to pick on that last statement. You know, again, you border on the line of insulting versus making commentary. So I hope it's the latter. I have always been concerned about our level of bylaw enforcement and the way that that department works. It's just so high profile. And when people are asking for things and it feels like it doesn't get around to being addressed, and then as a counselor, I'm waiting for it to circle back to me and understand, was it looked after or not, and to kind of close the loop with the resident to make sure that they understand what was done. There's angst there. And I can tell you, since this individual has arrived and this position has been filled, my angst has dropped significantly. So I'm very grateful that we've made this change. I think it's important that, in my mind, this role is approved as is. And I just wanted to sing the praises for the change that we've made. And I'm sure it's taken pressure off the clerk's department, but it never worked in my mind the way it was. It's working much better now. And I'm very appreciative of that. And I wanted to just offer that tonight.
I would second that. It's Mr. Wadikowski is doing an amazing job and really working with residents well and helping to mitigate some of those issues that we've been having in the past. So well said.
I'm receptive to the little counselor that's sitting at this table. So I'm very grateful.
Yeah. Was there any additional questions for Mr. Moore at this time? No, looks like you're off the hot seat for now. I will now move into Ms. Savage's department. Who would like to start with Ms. Savage's department? Deputy Mayor.
So first of all, I applaud the crossing guards. I don't really want to talk about that in any stretch. I think that the whole piece for me tonight is yourself and Mr. Richardson, Deputy Chief Richardson, and the fire. And then candidly, I'd love to get into the maker space as well and make sure we all understand that. But I think we should talk about this role a little bit and just understand it a bit more. I called it out yesterday, and again, I just want to be clear to the fire department and to our deputy chief, who I have great respect for. I just feel like we've come so far with the fire department. I'm not sure this is the right time to be doing this, but that's insulting for me to say because I'm not in the role. I'm not the operator. I'm not there on a regular basis. But as the person who's looking at the budget and has to pass it, I don't feel good about it as we sit here. And I was just wondering what your thoughts were, Ms. Savage and Deputy Chief Richardson, with that slant on it, and all the respect in the world to our fire department.
I'll turn it over to Ms. Savage first.
Thank you, Mayor Post. Deputy Mayor Taylor, I appreciate that. And I think it's important to take a deeper dive into it. And I know Acting Chief Richardson and I have had a few conversations. We spoke to the training officer as well. So I'm going to try and summarize my thoughts, my feelings, and where I believe that we need to explain why we've brought this FTE forward. So Orangeville's training program, it is quite renowned. It is, there's a high rate of success, well-trained firefighters and prevention staff. Training has become the cornerstone, and this is Chief Richardson's quote, cornerstone and embedded in the Orangeville fire culture. It is known around Southern Ontario or around our area. So as you read in the service level change, all fire training was downloaded to the municipality through OREG 34322. So Orangeville Fire does about 13,200 hours of training a year. So that's in 2023. There's 28 hours minimum training for full-time firefighters. There are 12 hours a month minimum for volunteer firefighters. So the majority of the training is done in-house. Yes, we know it was downloaded, but the majority of training is done in-house for a reason. So there's limited space externally in external training courses and certifications. So the downloading of training saturated the market. So everywhere else you go for a program, it's going to be full. External agencies have limited spots, and there's also limited local training opportunities. So let's say on average, we have 4 suppression staff or prevention staff that will enroll in an external opportunity that is offered maybe once every 6 to 12 months. In-house, that means we're only training 4 people in that mandatory program per year. In internal training, we can do 10 people in 1 week and 10 people in the next week. We can put through much more people at a higher rate for mandatory training. Our staff rely on those courses to receive a promotion. We have succession plans in place. So if there's only 4 spots available in an external training opportunity and there's 6 staff that are eligible for a promotion, who do you choose? Yes, we could put evaluation criteria in place, but you see that it presents a bit more of a complex problem. So in Orangeville, we have 1 training officer. We have training officer Adams, who implements 2 training programs, 1 for the volunteer firefighters and 1 for the full-time firefighters. Cities of a similar size, yes, may have 1 training officer, but in some cases, like St. Thomas and Stratford, they have 1 training officer, but they only have full-time firefighters. Collingwood, who is often a comparable, is 1 training officer and less than a third of what Orangeville Fire has in volunteer firefighters. So training officer Adams is required to build 2 training programs for 2 different forces. Last year, training officer Adams devoted 211 hours of overtime and 70 hours of unused vacation time in the last 2 years. And she is no longer able to facilitate adequate onboarding of new volunteer firefighter and suppression staff. So she had explained to me with exhaustion, each of them require time to sit down and time to go through the manuals and customize those manuals and customize these training. And it's not happening. Now, I will say she is devoted, she is committed. Her number one, and I can just tell from the short time that I've been here, she is devoted to making sure the community is safe and that the volunteer firefighters and the suppression staff have everything that they need to go out into the field. And I have no doubt that's not happening in other fire departments. But here you can tell, because of such a high quality training program, the level of commitment and the level of education skill that goes into the program, it's evident. So we've looked at ways to maximize and make the training program more efficient. We've downloaded what we can to the captains. They've reached capacity. They're delivering the ice water programs, the rapid intervention training programs, and survival programs. The internal recruit training program, it took about a year to develop. So once we have it in place for a year, yes, it would just need to be modified, but it is still a very time-consuming program. It since has been contracted out due to the heavy amount of overtime incurred on that 1 officer. So with an additional training officer, we could offer the training in-house, reduce external training costs, and we wouldn't incur as much overtime hours. It's an opportunity to keep these services in-house. And I know, Councillor Stevens, yesterday you had mentioned that money was spent on outsourcing across the board, across the corporation, and that staff should consider bringing it back in-house. We have an elite training program in-house, but we risk it going out of house to an external agency, which, as I already had mentioned, are not necessarily local, are going to cost more money for accommodations and touring, and do not have as many spots to register as the amount of people we need to train. So Town of Orangeville is accredited by the Fire Marshal's Office and the AS&E, which is Academic Standards and Evaluation. You would know it from Humber College, to develop, host the training and to proctor the exams. So we are well equipped, which also means our surrounding municipalities, those that are not even have a fire service agreement with us, others outside of our fire service agreements are looking to us and wanting us to connect them with training opportunities and written testing nights and ask if we can help proctoring. We are not in a position to do that. We want to be neighborly. We want to help out. At this point, we're not in a position. We will do it when we can, when we have the capacity. And so contracting out a portion of the work is not an option. This is also another point. I had asked sheepishly, can we contract it out? Can we support it with, 21-hour grant? The association will not permit that. This is not a position that can be contracted out. So it would go against the current collective agreement. So having said that, I'm going to pass it to Acting Chief Richardson for any final thoughts or additional thoughts.
Acting Chief Richardson, I'll turn it over to you. If we can just make sure the mic is on. Perfect.
Thank you, Your Worship. To Council, Gallery. GM Savage has eloquently said a lot of things that I don't come across as quite wordy. I'm more to the point in what I'm going to say. Ironically enough, tonight, as I was getting my backpack out with my computer, my paperwork, my fire coat and my fire helmet were sitting in the back of my vehicle. I looked at it, and one thing you'll see in all that equipment is you'll see a little slogan inside there. And I don't know if really a slogan is what it should say. It says, firefighting is an inherently dangerous activity that can either cause harm or death. So that's actually written right in the gear. It's kind of a prelude to where we're going. So as GM Savage has said earlier, training is the cornerstone of the fire department. And by having training, you can manage expectations. So with our municipal partners, they have expectations of what services we're going to give. The public, what they expect. As we see many people from the city moving into Orangeville, they really expect a fire truck to show up on scene. They expect the firefighters on there to be fully trained. Even to take it further than that, it doesn't matter if you're a volunteer firefighter, a full-time firefighter, part-time firefighter. The expectation is all the same. That person gets off that truck, does the job, and mitigates their problems. So in saying that training is a culture within Orangeville, it really is a culture. We see our people are asked to train in other places. They're wanted to train in other places. So we have a really high-level staff, professional staff that can get the job done. Also in saying that the development and because of the downloading of the regulations, Orangeville's been fairly, we're fortunate that we've had a lot of support from council years past in moving our training programs forward and keeping us up to date. In the OREG, firefighting certifications are to be completed by July the 1st, 2026. We're quite a well ahead of the curve. So as of today, all our staff are trained to the levels we need to be. We're onboarding 6 new people that need their training. We're ensuring that our officers are trained, our fire prevention people are trained, and there's a lot of maintenance to go along with that as well. So, and just in looking back and seeing that, we want to make sure that we are there for the people, that we have to train people. And if something does go wrong, we have the training, the paperwork and all that to say our people are trained and this is where we are today.
Thank you, Acting Chief. Well said. I have one question for you, and then I was going to kind of turn it to council to see if there was additional questions. With the addition of a new training officer, would we have, and knowing that the province has downloaded all the training responsibilities to the municipalities, do we have an opportunity with a second training officer to offer that service to fire services outside for a fee? Could we earn revenues by having a solid training program in-house that we could then offer out to other municipalities and earn some revenues back?
Through your worship, possibly there's a good opportunity for that, because presently in our recruit training program right now, the outside company is bringing other municipal partners into there. So if we had the opportunity to have that training person, we could offer the same programming that presently they're looking at doing with the outside company. So yes, there is an opportunity for revenue.
I think that would be a good addition to see, knowing that if we are adding that piece, I think it would be a really good opportunity to utilize some of the extremely well-trained officers that we do have right now to better train the rest of the province too, if we have that opportunity and if it's not a burden onto the department.
So if I may also add, when we put for the new fire station coming, we have a training area designed for that. We recently put a grant forward in regards to training. And part of that grant was to possibly expand the training to incorporate other areas, to bring other people, to bring other services into train. So that was under the Skills Canada, skills development portion of the grant portion of it.
Perfect. Yes, I remember that addition of the grant. Councillor McIntosh, and then Councillor Sherwood.
Thank you. Just for clarification on that last point, Ms. Savage, did you not say that they can't go out of our area basically doing training if we had a training officer because of the association? Did I mishear that? Or if they wanted to train Grand Valley Fire Department, Shelburne Fire Department, could that person be used for that particular job as a training officer?
Through you, Mayor Post, Councillor McIntosh. So just so I understand it correctly, if we have a second, or if one of our fire services staff is trained by one of our training officers, or if somebody from Grand Valley is trained by one of our training officers?
If the training officer in Orangeville was to go to Grand Valley and train them, is that allowed with the association?
I'm not sure.
Acting Chief.
At this present time, yes, they would be allowed. There could possibly be a cost associated with it. Ultimately, we would be holding the cost unless there was an agreement with the outside department to recuperate the cost.
Mr. Smith, do you want to add something?
I was just going to add that through you. I think Councillor McIntosh's question, I think the statement Ms. Savage made was that according to our collective agreement, we can't contract out, like we couldn't hire a contractor to do our training, something along that line.
Gotcha. Does that make sense? Okay. Councillor Sherwood, go ahead.
Yes, Your Worship, through you to Acting Chief. Page 100. So I'm just looking after just the general fire operating budget near the bottom, the outside services. Can you please explain to me the proposed increase? I would have thought if you're asking for another training officer that perhaps that's where some of the outside service costs might have come if you had to go outside. So I'm just wondering how come that is going up 20 some odd %. If you could maybe explain to me what's falling under outside services. It's the second from the bottom in the subtotals of the expenses.
Acting Chief Richardson.
Your Worship, to Councillor Sherwood. So outside services consists of we have a contract with Tillsonburg Fire for our dispatching services. So we're presently coming up into our 4th year into the contract. So we've had a 3-year contract. We have 2 1-year contracts aside by that. So what you see there is the actual increase in the contract, including the Next Gen 911 upgrades.
Good. Councillor Andrews and then Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just a comment. Having an arm's length connection to pre-firefighter training and what Ms. Savage provided was accurate, and also the information that was highlighted regarding the FTE was really an eye-opener for me too as well, regarding the number of hours of overtime, time in lieu. But Orangeville Fire is also anecdotally looked upon respectively throughout the province with other fire services. And the training that is done in-house is highly respected. It is on spot of what is required. And I think that what we require is, of course, the support that is needed for this particular position, because, you know, we were talking about this when I had spoken to Mr. Moore about, you know, creating a culture of support. We don't want to burn our people out. And it certainly sounds like we have, you know, one training officer that, you know, there's only so many hours in a day, so many hours in a week, so many hours in a year, and you still have the numbers and the requirements that have to be filled for certification. So, you know, I think that this is an opportune time for us to consider this position, and I would certainly endorse that when we get to that point in the agenda.
Thank you, Councillor Andrews. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. Ms. Savage, do you know
how many employees have we averaged at the fire department over the last 3 years? Like, have we always been 2 people? Like, I know it's not 2 people, but I mean, how many people is it? Is
Do you
it,
mean how many new FTEs each
No,
year?
no, how
Or
many-
just how many people work?
how many people work at the fire department?
25 through you, Mayor Post, Deputy Mayor Taylor, 25 full-time. We're always aiming for 30 volunteer firefighters. That will fluctuate, but as close to 30 as we can get.
And those are the bodies that we allocate, right? Is 25. We want like a full-fledged is 25. Have we been 24 or been 26, or what has the history been?
It fluctuates. I know we onboarded 3 new volunteer firefighters in the summer. One?
No, sorry.
Yeah.
Acting chief, go
Yeah,
ahead.
go ahead.
Slip in
Mhm.
for a minute. So full-time staffing is pretty steady. So when when GM Savage says that,
May I just re-ask my question if I could? So
Yeah.
I'm not actually asking how many you've hired or what have you. It's in this room right now, there's potentially 40 people.
Yeah.
Last year in this room, there was about 40 people. The year before that, there was 38 people. Have we hired more bodies over time that have, we want 40 people in this room. That's what we want as our number. Has the fire department changed the number year over year? So that it used to be 38, then it was 39, and now it's 40? Or where are we at? Have we added incremental bodies?
so presently we have 30 people, including the 6 we're going to onboard in the new year. So their start date is January the 8th. Our target number for this year, we're trying to get to 32. 32 is our number that we're shooting for our volunteer staff. So typically we're seeing, so last year we hired 5. Originally we wanted 10. So this year we wanted to 8. We got 6. So to make a long story short, there's a recruitment retention problem. It's not just in Orangeville, not Ontario, it's not Canada, it's North America wide.
Yeah.
So recruitment retention of the volunteer firefighter, part-time firefighter is a real issue that's out there. So trying to get enough people is the forecast is we're going to be recruiting people year after year after year. So back when, I'm going to say when Councillor McIntosh was fire chief, there was probably a time in that period back in that day when there was very little to no turnover. So times have changed. We're starting to see turnover. It's becoming problematic. Again, it's not just an Orangeville problem. It's a North American problem.
Does that answer your question? Deputy Mayor, go ahead.
So if I was to ask you, why do we need the incremental body? Like, couldn't we just have somebody from in-house be certified to be the trainer, and then we keep our bodies at the amount we have, and now we don't have to hire an incremental body and have the incremental cost? Is that a reasonable question? Or is that just not something that you could
So
recommend?
I'm kind of, I think I know where you're going with this, so I'm going to try to answer it. Again, there's a question about contracting out. So if we were to have somebody in-house so we have people doing in-house training. So we have our captains, senior people, qualified people doing training now. But to have a physical person who is a trainer all the time is actually a union job. So the successor rights of that job belong to the union, and it's basically their work. Hopefully that kind of helps you a little bit. Is that where you were going?
That's fine, but it can't be a body that's already, if I have 30 people, I can't stay at 30 people and just have one of those people be trained as a trainer? You're asking for a salary increase, like
Yes.
an allotment. What I'm saying is, can you stay within your allotment that you are today, and we just have someone who's already there be the trainer? That's not reasonable?
So just to clarify, you're saying could we move a current firefighter off of a truck and make that firefighter a training officer instead?
Again, it may sound ridiculous, but I'm not in the building. I don't operate the trucks.
I just want to clarify that that's what you're asking. Yes, okay.
That's exactly what I'm asking.
Okay. So let me kind of go back to your question. To move a firefighter off a vehicle would put some implications into our staffing So we have a minimum staffing of 4 full-time firefighters on the vehicle at the time. So there's 5 on a per platoon. So we have one person basically who is either on holidays, lieu days, sick. So typically somebody's out. So if you move somebody out of that division, say the suppression division, then you'll end up running probably into an overtime problem or issue. So kind of reallocating another position is not very feasible because now you run into other problems in regards to overtime staffing.
Got it. Yeah, that's what I was.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I understand the position for this year. Thank you for your patience with me. We move into 2025, 2026, and I guess I'll still be sitting here, not an election yet. I imagine you'll still be sitting there, and you're coming to us saying that you need to hire somebody else. And I think it's going to be a deputy chief, right? And so my concern is, we're not talking about just today. We're talking about today plus, and then you're going to come and you're going to ask for another body, and it's going to be plus. It's the second highest department, and I'm not diminishing what you do. It's super important. It's just tough to take the expenses on. Am I correct in where we're going in the next couple of years?
Through your worship, to Deputy Taylor. Continuity of business is a real big thing with us. Operations moving forward, looking at different things. So last night we talked a bit about the fire master plan, which is deferred to next year. So in that master fire plan from 2015, it was identified for a second position in regards to administration or the deputy chief of support services, fire prevention. So yeah, it's probably nothing new to come back at some point in time. It is identified, but presently at this time, the fire training officer was more important. It's a needed position to maintain operational readiness at the fire department at this time.
Ms. Savage, did you want to add something? Okay, saw your hand up a minute ago. I just wanted to make sure. Councillor Prendergast?
Thank you. I just have a couple of questions about the programming of the fire training officer. So who creates the curriculum or the program for the fire training program?
Acting Chief, yeah.
Yep, to Councillor Prendergast. So NFPA is the National Fire Protection Association. So all firefighters in the province of Ontario are certified to that standard. So in that standard, there's firefighter 1, firefighter 2, along with the company officers, instructors, fire prevention people as well. So it's kind of a standard. It's a generic standard. And how you deliver that program is basically set forth. So we've had our programming set, and it's been accredited. So we are, like, as GM Savage said, we are able to deliver the programming and maintain it more in-house. So a lot of things have happened over the last little while. This came along. We went through a COVID, so we moved some of our programming online. So we've made a lot of advances in our development of our programming and movement through. So training officer Adams is a big portion of that. Again, in the initial council report, you'll see they develop, they research, they implement all the right down to the finer details of the programming.
I sympathize with the need to plan and prepare, and you need time to do that. And developing a part-time and full-time program, running those simultaneously, I don't imagine is an easy feat. And if we want to stick to our vision of the town, it's innovation and safety, and I think that those run paramount to this position. I see the need maybe for this extra body and the potential maybe to generate revenue. Just another additional question. Are the firefighters members of the same union as the training officer?
Acting Chief?
Your Worship, Prendergast. Yes, they are.
Okay, would they, I guess as an add-on to Deputy Mayor's comment, would they be able to take on an additional role? Would the union allow that as a part-time training officer? Let's say the hours aren't necessary for a full FTE for an extra training officer? Could that be a reduced role?
Acting Chief?
Just working through this, trying to think this out in regards to how the collective agreement reads and in regards to how it is out. I'm going to probably say no at this time due to the way the collective agreement reads, because in the collective agreement, it does state they are responsible for so many hours of work. There is no deviation in regards to the hours of work as well as the positions.
Okay, that makes sense. And I know there are many nuances with collective agreements and we must respect those. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Prendergast. Councillor Sherwood?
Yes, Your Worship. This one actually is going to be directed to our treasurer on page 100. I'm going to have two questions, Your Worship, but depending on how he answers the first one is how I'm going to submit my second question.
I like that.
So,
choose your own adventure.
Question number one is reserves. I'm known for being the one with the R word because I know how important topping up reserves are. So, can you clarify to me? On page 100, there's $270,000 being allocated to reserves. Is that going specifically to fire reserves or is it going into the general reserves?
Mr. Kelly?
Great question. Thank you through you, Mayor Post. So that is going into two separate reserves, $200,000 into the fire fleet reserve and $70,000 into the fire equipment reserve. And with that, I will reiterate, I look forward to establishing a reserve fund framework and having all of this laid out for council to understand more clearly.
Thank
I've
you.
noticed
Do you have a follow-up? Yeah.
through Your Worship. So that kind of abolishes what my second thought was, because I thought, why couldn't we reduce the reserves going into the fire reserve? And we may still want to do that if council's open to this, to fund this training officer. So in other words, 150,000, if that's the FTE, I forget the amount, then we only put 120,000 reserves.
Mr. Kelly?
Yeah, through you, Mayor Post, I'll bring up the term asset management again. I think the deputy chief could also speak to the price of fire trucks these days. Putting money into reserves will help us avoid getting back into deficit reserves, which in the past there were within the fire service. A fire truck that used to cost, I'm going to use numbers just because from my history with it, that used to cost $300,000 now costs just over $1 million. That's changed within the last 10 years. Funding needs to be put into reserve funds to pay for those apparatus.
Just one quick follow-up. So as I go through this whole document, in each department, there is a transfer to reserves. And just for clarification, the reserves will be going specific to that department and not to general reserves. So like I just asked you if this is going to fire, you've reiterated that it's fire. Because I find typically what happens is we approve a budget and it happens all throughout the year. People come ask for extra money. They want to take it out of general reserves. I fight like heck to say, no, it doesn't come out of our reserves. So I want to know that in the whole operating budget throughout this whole document, that each department, when you are asking for extra money to be put in reserves, it's going specific to that department and not to general. The 1.5 million that I asked you about in corporate is going to general.
That's correct. Everything you've said is correct,
Thank
Councillor
you.
Sherwood.
Perfect. Additional questions for either Ms. Savage or for Acting Chief? Well, we've got him on the hot seat still. No, we're looking good. Deputy Mayor.
I guess I'm just still trying to think about this a little bit, Chief Richardson. The piece that is bothersome to me is what are we going to keep doing here, right? So we're gonna add this body, and like in the business world, adding a body is a big deal. Like it's hard to get a body. You can reallocate again if you've got 40 members, you can reallocate in within your 40, but to go to 41 or 42, it's a big deal. And so I'm thinking already about the next position that I think you're going to ask for as we go forward in our plans. Like, is there a way we could say as part of this that we wouldn't do it this term?
Ms. Savage.
Thank you, Mayor Post. Deputy Mayor Taylor, I'm not going to make a promise like that. We have a fire master plan for 2025. It will help guide what we do in the future. Chief Richardson and I and the team, we're going to build the staffing plan and build the resources plan and the reserves and the operating and the capital and the budgets and everything that has based on what we know now and knowing what we need in the future. So this is the immediate need. A training officer is a complement that will fully support all aspects of the fire services to us and to those that have contracts with us who pay for services that we are to offer them. We've recognized this as the main need. Will we return and say, do we need a deputy? We recognize that there are some pressure points within the administration of the fire services. So usually with deputies, one is responsible for administration, one is responsible for operations. Right now, we're looking at the deputy and the fire chief. So today is may not be a good example of how we can manage it all at one time. In the future, we may bring to you a business case to say this is what we need. At that point, we understand that the will of council is to make these decisions responsibly and be fiscally responsible when presenting staffing opportunities. We're going to keep that in mind. And I think our biggest support or recommendation will come from a fire master plan. We can ask that tough question saying, all right, well, on paper, it may look like we can add a deputy to our fire services, but do we need it? What do they do? And how do you break down those responsibilities? And then we would present the details. And at that point, we can decide.
Yep, go ahead.
I just want to clarify, and thank you for that answer. I'm good. I just want to clarify. It's not lost on me what's happened to you, Chief Richardson. I imagine going on holidays is difficult. I imagine running the department as, and I don't want to be disrespectful to the rest, but as one person who's looking after everything. And I know you have great captains there, but it's not sustainable, right? So I get that. Just our role here is to also watch what we're doing from a taxpayer levy and ask these kinds of questions, right? So if there's issues within that organization, and again, we're not there, those are conversations that we should have. It's just, if this is your best foot forward as the safety officer, and no disrespect to that position, then fine. But if it really should be a deputy, then, maybe that's a different discussion that we should be having, right? So
Ms. Savage, do you want to reply to that piece?
Thank you. Good observation. We're confident in the training officer request. And I must say, since I've been here in February working closely with the fire department, it is a cohesive, well-run fire services. We want to continue to support them so there are no cracks. If there are any cracks, the first thing you're going to see is safety. The second thing you're going to see is a breakdown internally of that of the way the operation runs and how well it runs. So we feel that this is our best option to keep that fire services as high quality as it is right now.
Thank you, Ms. Savage. Councillor Sherwood and then Councillor Stevens.
Yes, Your Worship. Correct me if I'm wrong, but last year when we approved our budget, the compensation under fire included salaries for a chief and a deputy chief. In my opinion, if there's nowhere in this budget that reflected that you have removed a deputy chief's salary from the compensation. To me, it's still parked in there. It's just a vacant position. So why would we be asking for a deputy chief when I don't see anywhere in this document that says, okay, we don't have a deputy chief, but that salary was still approved last year. And to me, it's just sitting vacant. So
Ms. Savage?
I'm totally I'm trying to understand when you're talking about a future ask, why would there be a future ask?
A future ask for a second deputy chief, which was outlined in the fire master plan.
Right.
Not for the first. So the salaries are staying the way that they are.
The first one's still parked as vacant. Correct.
Correct.
Thank you. Sorry for that.
No problem. Councillor Stevens?
Thank you, through your worship. So how many full-time fire personnel at your station?
Acting chief?
Through your worship to Councillor Stevens, there's 20 in fire suppression, 1 in training, and 3 in fire prevention.
And that leads to my next question, if I can. Is there a mandate, if you have so many staff, you have to have so many deputies or supervisors?
Through your worship.
Acting chief?
Your worship to Councillor Stevens, no, it's based on need and requirement. So have a holistic look at the department to determine if it's needed. Again, back in 2015, when the original fire master plan was written. It was deemed probably it wasn't needed right at the time. So we're 9 years out now. Looking back, perhaps at some point in time, there might be a need for that position.
And then my very last question on this topic. Is it a fire officer or a fire captain? Because I've heard different rationales this week.
Acting Chief.
To your worship, to Councillor Stevens. So the position is the fire training officer.
Okay, thank you.
Does that cover your questions? We're good. Any additional questions about fire? Councillor Prendergast.
Thank you, Mayor Post. Has there ever been a time where firefighters, volunteer or full-time, have been at risk of not fulfilling their training hours because the current training officer is at max capacity?
Acting Chief Richardson.
Through your worship, to Councillor Prendergast. I will say no to that question. Our training officer is very organized, and when I say organized, she's very organized. So looking to the future is not a problem for her. She is well organized and looking forward. So she's well planned. So when we say planning, she's already got kind of the 2024 training plans pretty much laid out right to the middle of the year almost right now. So she's very organized, very eager to get the training out. It's almost a compulsive addiction for her to do it.
Yeah, go ahead, Ms. Savage.
Thank you, Mayor Post. Councillor Prendergast, if I may add that there won't be inefficient training. There will just be time delays. So similar to construction, the longer you hold off, the longer it will take to build, to supply. In the training world, if we don't have in-house opportunities, which at times we don't, we have to go external. It means that the frequency of those courses that are required are going to be less and less. So the people who need the training will get it, but it won't be until 6 months down the road, which means they won't be skilled in that when it comes to fighting the fire or an emergency situation.
Thank you, Ms. Savage. Any additional questions about fire? Councillor Sherwood.
Thank you, Worship. So I think what I've read, Ms. Savage, through your what you just said is that basically when we bring in new volunteers, they don't get thrown on a truck right away. There is multiple trainings that required. So this would help expedite them in getting them on the truck ready sooner. So this is causing a delay because some of these I'm sure they're very eager to get on there and start, really fighting the fires and doing what they want to do. It's delaying them. So typically we could get a firefighter on a truck in 3 months compared to 6 months. I don't know what the timeline is, but that's where I'm kind of getting from you.
Ms. Savage?
Through you, Mayor Post, Councillor Sherwood. Yes, that's precisely right. And as it's been explained to me, the way we recruit is sometimes there are volunteer firefighters that come to us without all of the training that is required or mandated. So in order to increase recruitment efforts, we say if you have a few training, no problem, come in. We're going to give you your firefighting level 1 and we're going to give you your firefighting level 2. And then we also know when we do it in-house, it is according to the needs of the Orangeville Fire Service. It's not necessarily done by a private agency where we have no quality assurance control.
Thank you, Ms. Savage. Additional questions for fire? Okay, then at this time, I think it's a good time to take a 10-minute break. If we can come back at 8:50, we will see everybody back then. Okay, everybody, welcome back. If we can quiet down, let's get going. We're going to still stick with Ms. Savage. We're going to stay on community services. I think that there was more questions for community services, but I believe we've moved past fire for now, but don't go anywhere too fast, Chief Richardson. Any questions about any of the other areas of community services? Deputy Mayor.
So my sense is this makerspace is going to be passed. I've spent time with the CAO of the library. I still think it's a really good thing in a public forum on a budget to explain what a makerspace specialist does. Candidly, I still find, and I told Ms. Fraser this, I don't get it. But I think I'm the minority, and it sounds like the library is very passionate about it, and they've made it very clear to me that they need this thing to be passed. I still don't understand it.
Ms. Savage, do you want to take this one?
Sure, Mayor Post, thank you. Deputy Mayor Taylor. So without reiterating what's in the council report, a makerspace is a common element of a public library. And I'm just going to read, I kind of did a little bit of my own research thinking, and I know what it is. I know it's innovation. I know people go there. I know that entrepreneurs, if they have to go and create a business card for themselves, they don't have to go to Vistaprint. They can go to the makerspace and do it themselves, and they can design it, or they can learn how to do those things. So it's all of those skills all in one place. The best one that I found was it was to create intellectual and physical materials using resources such as computers, 3D printers, audio, video capture. My kids would love to be in a makerspace to do their YouTubing and their TikToking, and they can do it in a professional space. It's a great thing to do. It's a hobby, but it also is developing coding. It's developing filming, producing, so many other skills that come along that you're not going to find in the school system. You're not going to find in a recreational program. So as I mentioned, it's a common element of public libraries. There are a lot of libraries around here. Caledon has 3 makerspaces. Innisfil was the original one. Stratford has one. What Orangeville Public Library is proposing to do is build a modest makerspace using existing space that was formerly the Humber College area. So this space is already brilliantly designed for it. We're capitalizing on what was already there. It also responds well to the 2021 survey where residents conveyed a strong interest in makerspace. There was over 1,500 responses to that survey. So it's good representation of what the community is looking for. Best practices in the industry strongly recommend a specialized staff, and that's where the makerspace specialist comes in. It's not enough to go and put in a librarian there. And please don't think that they have any capacity to run this new, I guess, amenity within the library system. So the specialists in particular will do everything. They're going to develop the policies, the operating procedures, design the space, implement and evaluate the programs, work with our facilities team, work with our recreation team, advertise these where they're going to train, guide, support the other library staff. They're going to be available evenings and weekends when we think that this maker space is going to be best open for. They're gonna look for partners. So we already know, as explained in the service level change, the SBAC Center is the Small Business Enterprise Center is eager and keen to have this type of resource for them to direct small business owners to. So guiding partnerships. And they're also going to secure funding and grants and modernizing our services, innovation grants. This will meet the bill, fit the bill on many occasions. They want to repurpose that space into 3 components: a maker lab, a media lab, and a STEM lab. So yesterday we did discuss libraries, a little bit about the circulation expenses. So there is a request in the capital, 200,000 or just over 200,000. So currently there's 137,000 for physical resources allocated for physical resources in the library. There's 75,000 for electronic resources. Makerspace will increase access and interest in those electronic resources, which we know by yesterday's conversation, we're paying a little bit more for an electronic resource or electronic book rather than a hard copy book. So overall, the Orangeville Public Library has about 80,000 pieces in their collection, with 175,000 of it in circulation. So that circulation number is higher because they're constantly taking out items, putting in items. So at any given time, we own 80,000, but throughout the year, we're removing and adding to accumulate up to 175,000. It's a high turnover rate. So the lesser used or unwanted items are removed. So the value of those items are determined by many variables. One of them would be the makerspace would tell us, what are people interested in? What are they not? It's an avenue we have not explored before, but we know everybody else is doing it. And it's not as though, people are jumping off a bridge, we need to do it. I think that this is a really good initiative that is getting a lot of traction in a lot of places. So as I mentioned, the value of items is determined by many variables. One of those is a simple metric is max circulation. So if a resource is really hitting the mark, it means that 12 people are using or borrowing that resource 12 times per year. We can see that our electronic resources may increase because of makerspace, and there's other ways we'll look at increasing other items in the circulation to meet that max 12 people per year borrowing that item.
That answer your question, Deputy Mayor?
That is super impressive information you just gave there. So thank you very much. That was way more than I was expecting. Thank you.
Councillor Andrews.
Wow. Thank you very much, Your Worship, and thank you very much, Ms. Savage. What I was here to do is to provide just further support in defining what the makerspace specialist would be. I was thinking back 24 hours ago, I spoke about that ED strategy and thinking about it today, post-COVID. This is where library services has to go. We're at a point where, having the makerspace specialist on site is going to move our library to a different level in supporting the expectations of our community now and for the next 10, 15, 20 years. And the connection that you spoke about with the EDC as an example, through SBEC, we have a variety of different small business entrepreneurs who are trying to figure out how to move some of their thoughts, their plans, their ideas to a different level. And this is one way it will be supported as well.
Thank you, Councillor Andrews. Any additional questions? Councillor Stevens. And then Councillor Prendergast.
Through your worship, a gentleman at this table who I respect deeply once told me that if I'm going to oppose something, I should tell you why. So at this time, I would like to push it out a year. I just don't feel it's necessary today. And for that, I will be opposing it later on.
Councillor Prendergast.
Thank you. Just to preface this, I'm an elementary school librarian. I'm also the vice chair of the library board and an avid reader. And someone whose son today had to go to the Caledon East Makerspace with his Cub Scout group because we don't have the facility here in town. So we have youth leaving town to search for and seek out innovative experiences in other municipalities. When I presented this case, and I said this, I'm also a member of the Ontario Library Association's regional board. I asked my fellow board members, how could I advocate for this role to my council? They laughed and they said, I can't believe that your town doesn't have a makerspace already. So we are behind the times when it comes to innovation. And just to revisit our vision statement, which I know we're all familiar with, Orangeville is a sustainable, safe, and diverse community that is friendly and open to new people and innovative opportunities. If we miss this opportunity, we're missing out on innovation, potential economic development with entrepreneurs, relationships with schools, nearby schools. Alder is so close to West Side. Youth, we're looking for how do we engage teenagers in town? This is a way to engage teenagers and provide them with an opportunity to do something. Instead of kind of hang around Alder, they can hang around Alder and make TikToks and podcasts, and who knows, maybe become the next internet sensation. Not only that, it kind of it addresses the gap in the digital, divide within our communities. So it creates inclusion with digital access. So maybe people who don't have these kind of technologies at home, they can seek them at the library, which is just fantastic. So we might have disenfranchised individuals being able to 3D print or who knows what. Without this kind of innovation, I don't think we will be a future ready city or town rather, and I think it would be remiss for this council to push this. Again, we have the funding in place for the materials. We have the space. It's already earmarked. Now we just need the body to run it. And I think we're really on the verge of something awesome here. And I just hope council supports it.
Thank you, Councillor Prendergast. Any additional questions for the Community Services Department at this time? Okay, seeing none. Take a breather for a minute, Ms. Savage. We will turn it over to Mr. Koselak. We will look at the Infrastructure Services operating budget. Was there questions for Mr. Koselak at this time? Deputy Mayor?
I'd just like to talk about, and I've lost the absolute item, but Mr. Curry, Derek Curry, who looks after our projects, came to me and made sure that I understood why he needed the person that he needed and wanted to make sure that I fully understood and was going to vote in favor. And I am in favor if he was here, but he's not here. So I'm going to vote against it. I just wanted to state how important I think that position is. And I don't know, Tim, if you wanted to talk any further about it, but you know, maybe the public doesn't understand it or what have you, but my consternation sitting here is the unfinished projects and the way that it kind of goes down. And again, no slight to staff, but you need those people in place to be able to ensure that these things happen. And as an example, Broadway Bricks was brilliant. It was so disruptive because of what happened, but it wasn't disruptive because of the way we managed it. And I'd love to see our projects go to that. And I think what Mr. Curry is trying to do is spot on.
Mr. Koselak?
Through your worship, the Broadway Bricks is a great example of what was done. And actually, Mr. DeLeese was the project manager, we'll call it, for that project. He led that project and did a great job on it. And I think that goes sort of the example of what that position would be. Mr. DeLeese has to go back and do more in the transportation and development. He can't be out doing the project management, but you need that body to lead the project, to develop the terms, to oversee the construction, to do the tendering. It's hard if it's on the side of somebody's desk to be able to do it. And a lot of it, we're trying to work through the asset management too. So this position for the project manager roads, they're going to be our lead for road condition index and asset management. They're going to be delivering the tenders for our road reconstructions. They're also going to do our road resurfacing. I think it was a great timing. We did the section of Broadway in front of Town Hall, and it just showed how the resurfacing, less disruption, cheaper price, but still a great product that'll last. So that's what we want the position to be able to do, develop the long-term plan and also deliver the projects. And what we're trying to do too, we want to design projects one year, tender it the following year. Sometimes in the past, there's been a thought to design it in the spring, tender it in the summer, and you end up tendering it too late in the year and construction starts in July or August. So what we want to try and do is get a few of the projects even designed ahead of time so they're shovel ready. Even if there's government funding announced for something, we have a shovel ready project and we can apply for funding for it. But we can get our projects ready so as soon as council approves the capital budget, we can tender it the week later. And that way we get contractors earlier and hopefully more aggressive pricing because they're looking for work, but also they can start the project first thing in the spring.
Thank you, Mr. Koselak. Deputy Mayor?
Thank you very much, Mr. Koselak. One other thought for you, and you know, candidly for the public and council, I told Mr. Koselak I was going to do this to him. And my question to you is do you have everything you need? And I want to give you an example of a pinch point that I see, and it's this role. We talked yesterday a lot about sidewalks and trees, and that individual who is on your team who looks after that is one person. They have so much to do, and if I could be frank, it's, you know, things fall off that individual's plate, not because of capability, but because of capacity. Do you have everything that you need going forward so that, you know, we can look after these things in a expeditious way?
Mr. Koselak?
Through your worship, one of the things, I guess, it leads up, we're having a report come forward on the December 11th meeting. You're talking about a position in the transportation and development area. We had one budgeted in 2022 prior to my coming. We had a project manager and we had a technologist. And the internal person was the technologist, and they were promoted into the project manager role. And that technologist position has been vacant. It was approved as part of the 2023 budget as a position. But unfortunately, we didn't have sort of the HR approval to put a box on the org chart. So we're going to be coming forward with a report on December 11th. We have the budget, we have the need for the position, but fundamentally it's to put that box on the org chart. And that'll give us another person that works in that area. Because that person, they do our trees, they do our transit, they do our traffic, they do our road occupancy permit for utilities. So that way we have a little bit of diversity. And also if somebody goes on vacation, the department still can operate. So that'll be a big asset for us. We had considered in the budget some summer students to help with the road construction. They weren't included, but we will look at that for 2025 as the program develops. And we'll also be looking at the stormwater for 2025. I think that's one of the things we're trying to do an evaluation on the ponds, just to develop the program so then when we come forward, we can have a better outline on the needs and the process for it.
Thank you, Mr. Koslak. Deputy Mayor, does that cover everything? Any additional questions on infrastructure services? Councillor Stevens.
Thank you, Your Worship. For the fleet service manager, supervisor, sorry. Is this person going to be also a mechanic? Is that part of the position?
It's Councillor Stevens. Mr. Koslak.
Through Your Worship, the person will be a mechanic, so they'll be the fleet supervisor managing the fleet. They'll also be doing the long-term planning. So we don't really have a fleet plan right now. So we'd like to be able to look at it and say, okay, the vehicles will be used for a certain purpose. Then we can hand them down to a lesser purpose. So you have a truck for frontline for say 3 or 4 years, move it down similar to the firefighters, the way they discussed it yesterday. But the person would also be a mechanic. So there'll be a great advantage in the wintertime when we have equipment break. We'll have 2 mechanics working, or if somebody's off due to illness or vacation, we still have coverage, because that's the hard part in the wintertime. You can't send things out to a shop on Christmas Eve. We physically need the body in there to fix the vehicles.
Councillor Stevens, any follow-up?
No, thank you very much.
Okay. Councillor Sherwood.
Yes, Your Worship. Thank you very much. Page 207 under the Public Works operating budget, and it also will be talking about 208. There's an increase in the outside services by over 443,000. On page 208, it speaks about outside services going up 11,000. Can I maybe have an explanation as to what all is falling in that outside services bucket and what caused a $443,000 increase?
Mr. Koslak.
Page 207. And
207, 208.
then the other amount I'm speaking on under the material drivers under 208 refers to outside services being 11,700. However, under the operating budget itself, it has gone up 443,000, a 30% increase.
Mr. Kelly.
Thank you, Mayor Post. So if you are looking at page 208, that large $400,000 sum that's on 207, it's reflected on the service level impacts. And we've talked about these last night and tonight. These are increased investments within the sidewalk program and increased investments within storm network repairs and a flushing program. That's where your 400 and some odd thousand combined increase in outside services is coming from. A portion that you're referring to, the 11,200, is strictly the inflationary adjustment to what was existing in there, combination with all those new additions, those additional service deliveries. That's what gets your $400,000 adjustment.
Follow up, Councillor Sherwood, or are you good?
I guess I'm just a little confused on, so you're mentioning on page 208, the service level impacts. So for example, you got increased sidewalk repairs and replacements of 180,000. So you're telling me that 180,000 falls within the outside service of the 1.9 million on 207?
Through you, Mayor Post, correct. So it's actually helpful to provide clarity for people that are reading it on their own as well. So the first page is always going to show you the total change within that budget line. The impacts or service level impacts that you're going to see on the second page are the material drivers, but it's broken down by, was this a material driver caused by inflation? Was this a material driver caused by new service levels in there? So it's split out on the next page, but the combination of them is all within outside services.
Excellent. Any additional questions from members of council for infrastructure services? Waterworks as well. you have a question there, Councillor Sherwood? Okay. We'll give her a second to find it.
Can you explain to me the difference between the water and wastewater works study for 90K and the water optimization study of 350K?
Mr.
And I'm
Kosler?
sorry, I think that's capital. Yeah, I missed out on that.
Oh. Do you still want to explain the difference while we're here?
Sure. Well, the second study we're talking about is looking for more water capacity. So it's a well capacity evaluation that we're looking at. The first one, I think, was more for the wastewater treatment plant to look at capacity improvements on the facility. So there are two different studies, but they are underway.
Okay, any additional questions from members of council? Okay, any additional questions for anybody? Not just Tim this time, for any of the general managers or for Mr. Kelly from any of the previous areas we discussed, kind of one last chance for now before I go into question period, because that's what I'll do next. We're good? Councillor Sherwood's good? Okay, so we will do public question period as the next section before we go into the reports that are in there. So any member of the public, are there any online, Jerry? No. Any member in the gallery wishing to ask a question can approach. Yeah, go ahead, Mr. Ramsey. If you can just turn on the mic, state your name and address for the record, and go ahead and ask your question.
Thank you, Mayor Post. My name is Noel Ramsey. I live at 15 Feed Street in Orangeville. There's a couple of procedural questions. There was some mention to the reserve, sorry, not the reserve, the surplus from 2022, and I think there was mention that it goes into the surplus. Or sorry, not into the surplus, into the reserve. But as we go through the operating budget as well as the capital budget, some of those items are paid from or funded from the reserve. Isn't it the net same result that we're using the previous year's surplus? If it goes into the reserve and we're still funding items from the reserve, we're using the surplus for the current year, are we not?
Mr. Kelly, go ahead.
Yeah, through you, Mayor Post. It's an interesting question, but fairly clearly, I think I mentioned before, we can't project surpluses. We can't predict when that's going to happen. So we do allocate those funds into the general capital reserve. We do also budget for transfers to the general capital reserve, along with the other reserves mentioned by Councillor Sherwood earlier. All the funds that flow into the reserve are accessible for the capital program, not just for the current year, for the long-term capital program and fulfillment of our asset management strategies.
So it actually could fund 2025, 2026, where it's still going to help us pay the reduce the tax levies, right?
I would say it's not going to help us reduce, sorry, through you, Mayor Post. It may not directly help us reduce tax levies, but it is going to help us to build a sustainable capital program.
Okay. And on page 51 and on page 23, this was with regard to the ORDC interest. I saw a lot of kind of pluses and minuses on page 51 for the years 2022 and 23, as well as reversals on page 23. And I kind of got lost in the numbers. So my basic question is, the interest from the ORDC, are we using that, or is some of it illegible to use for reducing the levies?
Mr. Kelly?
Through you, Mayor Post. So I do concur with you. It's a little difficult to follow. There is a lot of in and out with regards to the RDC funds. It is all disclosed within the document, but as mentioned earlier this evening, last year's budget included interest from 2022 investment of ORDC funds and the full interest from 2023 investment of ORDC funds, not to be used to fund operations, to be used to repay the existing loan from the town to ORDC. So the adjustments that you're seeing is the removal of 2022 and 2023, about $1.24 million that equates to, and then the addition of $971,000, which is what we are guaranteed to receive in investment income this year.
Okay, thanks. And just a question, and this is more procedural. When you have your budget and you have the reserves, and then throughout the year, I think back over, Mr. Moore mentioned that a situation may crop up throughout the year where you have a new contractual agreement that you have to enter into and there's no funds. Or is a department, through approval, I guess, of the CAO or whoever, is a department allowed to enter into new contractual agreement that requires funds, but it's not available without coming to council?
There is a dollar amount allocation that department heads are allowed to, and I don't know off the top of my head what the dollar amount is. Perhaps Mr. Kelly does.
Yeah, there's the reserve, or the dollar thresholds that GMs and other people within the organization are held to are at certain levels. 120, I believe, is the number that's stuck in my head right now. Having said that, a GM or a purchaser couldn't enter into a contractual agreement that's going to draw funds from reserve funds that haven't been approved by council. If we needed to use funds out of the reserve funds, they would need to come back to council to do that.
Okay, and my last question is regards to income from disposable of assets, which is probably from last night. When you're buying new vehicles, the old vehicles are disposed of. Is there, I don't know if they get a trade-in allowance, or are the used vehicles sold? Where do those funds go to?
Mr. Kelly?
Yep, through you, Mayor Post, those funds get returned back into the reserve fund for fleet. I mentioned that one earlier this evening, that there is a dedicated reserve fund for fleet. So any sale of equipment, sale of surplus equipment would go into the fleet reserve fund. Then we use the fleet reserve fund to help our long-term fleet program.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ramsey. Was there any other questions? Mr. Smith, go ahead. Same deal. Have a seat, name and address for the record, and go ahead and ask your question.
Matthew Smith, 38 McCarthy Street. I don't know if it's going to come up later or not in the discussions, but if it's possible, I'd like to ask Councillor Stevens to explain his position for not wanting to support the library makerspace position.
Leave that up to Councillor Stevens, whether he wants to have that conversation now or later or at all. That's up to you. You can choose to answer that how you will.
Basically, through your worship, sorry. I just, the budget's high, trying to keep it as low as possible. And that's my reasoning for it.
Okay.
That's the short answer. So
can I get a long answer?
It's probably going to be similar, just
more words. Okay.
Yeah, it's just I just want to push it out a year. Just like other things we tried to do last night. That's why.
Okay.
Did you have anything else?
Oh, yeah. I'd just like to say that I feel that if it does get pushed out another year, I think it's doing a great disservice to the community. The makerspace is an important position for the library and for the library system to have and for the residents of Orangeville. I feel the Orangeville Library is already behind other municipalities, even a similar size. I mean, obviously larger population size is a bit of a different situation, but municipalities of a similar size have a makerspace available. And I have co-workers that have utilized it in, like I said, in small municipalities. They've loved it. And Councillor Prendergast's example of her son having to go to Caledon East to use their library, the makerspace there, I think, we should have one here. And I think Orangeville deserves to have one here.
I appreciate your comments. Thank you.
Thank you.
Deputy Mayor, go ahead.
Just as a thought, like whenever I hear a question, I always think, well, what's the rationale for the question? Why are we talking about that? And my sense is, and we don't get together and talk about things beforehand. Now, everything unfolds in real time. I don't know how the makerspace vote is going to go, but my sense is it's going to be 6-1, maybe 5-2 is where we're heading. So to me, it's great that you think that, but I don't know why you would feel you needed to offer that based on the comments that council has given. It sounds like everybody's mostly positive towards that space.
Well, I know there was a vote that came up yesterday that I was surprised at the result of, and I just don't want to see a surprise tonight. So I just feel that being able to voice my opinion, my concern about this as a resident of Orangeville, I think I wanted to say my piece.
Go ahead.
What was that vote? What are we referring to?
The sidewalk and tree vote.
Oh, but those are completely different things, right?
I know. It's just frustrating seeing the money that was planned to be put into the trees get moved into the sidewalks, and then,
My sense is the makerspace is just fine.
well, I hope so. We'll find out later.
Thank you for your comments, Mr. Smith.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Was there anybody else in the gallery wishing to ask a question? Not seeing anybody? We're good. Okay, so thank you for your questions. We will then move into the reports. Right now, you'll see that they're listed under a consent agenda. We're not going to do them as consent agenda. We're going to deal with each unit separately. And we're going to treat them just as staff reports. So we will start with 12.1.1, which is a service level change to the part-time crossing guards. The recommendation is that report CMS 2023-53 service level change, part-time crossing guards be received, and that subject to the approval of the 2024 budget, staff will be directed to recruit 2 part-time crossing guards, and that staff proceed to incorporate these costs within the draft 2024 operating budget under the Community Services Library Crossing Guard budget. Can I have a motion, please? Councillor Prendergast and Councillor Andrews. Final questions or comments on that item? All in favor? And that one is carried unanimously. Next, we will move to 12.1.2, which is a service level change for the fire training officer. The recommendation in the report is that report CMS 2023-54 service level change regarding fire training officer be received, and that subject to the approval of the 2024 budget, staff be directed to recruit 1 full-time permanent training officer, and that staff proceed to incorporate these costs within the draft 2024 operating budget under fire community services budget. Can I have a motion, please? Councillor Andrews, seconded by Councillor Prendergast. Any final questions or comments on the fire training officer? Deputy Mayor.
I would just like to publicly state, my plan tonight was to vote against this. I did not think it was a good idea, and that's why we have discussions. So I would like to thank you, Ms. Savage, for your comments and your education tonight, and certainly would like to thank you, Acting Chief Richardson, for your ability to answer our questions and stand there and kind of hold your ground and educate me. I will be voting in favor of this, and that's why I have the meeting, because I wasn't going to. And I just wanted to share that with the group, and I thank you both for the discussion.
Thank you for that, Deputy Mayor. And I wanted to add as well to that comment. Last year, when we were looking at the budget, we talked a lot as a council about the importance of FTEs and service level changes and the importance of them being data-driven decisions. And I think that both Acting Chief Richardson and Ms. Savage did an excellent job producing the data that's required to support this position. Stats, statistics, important information that really helps council to make sure that we're making appropriate decisions to take care of the community, but also to meet our strategic priorities and make sure that we're delivering what we promised we were going to do as a council. And I know adding FTEs is a difficult decision for council because those are ongoing costs. And I just really appreciate the data that was put into not just this one, but all of the reports that were here, because they are giving us the data that we require to make really, really important staffing decisions. So thank you to everybody who was involved in these reports, because I too, like Deputy Mayor, was on the fence about this position. So the commentary with the data that you were able to provide really changed my opinion on how we were going to move forward with this position. So I appreciate that commentary. Was there any additional questions or comments on this piece? Okay, seeing none, I'll call the vote. All in favor? And that carried unanimously. Next, we'll move to 12.1.3, which is a service level change for the makerspace specialist. The recommendation is that report CMS 2023-55 service level change makerspace specialist be received, and that subject to the approval of the 2024 budget, staff be directed to recruit 1 full-time permanent makerspace specialist, and that the staff proceed to incorporate these costs within the draft 2024 operating budget under Community Services Library Board budget. Can I have a motion, please? Councillor Andrews and Councillor Prendergast. Last comments or questions on the makerspace? Councillor Stevens.
Thank you, Your Worship. Although I publicly said I won't be supporting this, I didn't say I don't want the makerspace person to be hired. I just wanted to push it out a year. I received some support, or people reached out and thought that this could have been waited for a year. Not that I don't want it. Okay, so I just want to make sure that it's publicly known.
No, I appreciate your commentary, Councillor Stevens, and that's why these votes are important, and why it's important that we have 7 people on this council to make our decisions. We get different input that way. Any additional questions or comments on this one, Deputy Mayor?
I just think it's interesting, like that, the commentary is well received, and I thank you for your comments. The piece then that I would have done is, and just sharing out loud, I would have put forth a motion saying, let's keep this budget whole. Like the monies need to be allocated and put forth in a different way. And that's what I would have done with it. So even if you wouldn't have been successful here, we would have been having another discussion about how do we control that? And I don't think that's crazy spending. The town has so many needs at this point that I think it was important that we would allocate that funds and make sure that staff came back to us and had a different plan. And I just wanted to be upfront with what I was going to do if that was successful or if the fire hall was successful. We weren't getting this down. This budget is pretty tight. You may disagree with a line or two, but in reality, we need to push these projects forward. And so I just wanted to bring that forth and be open and honest with what my next recourse was going to be if something like that went through.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Any additional comments? You're good. Any additional questions or comments on this item? Then I will call the vote. All in favor? And any opposed? And Councillor Stevens opposed. Next, we will move to 12.1.4. The recommendation is that report CPS 2023-90, service level change permanent full-time financial analyst be received, and that subject to the approval of the 2024 budget, staff be directed to convert the existing contract financial analyst role into a full-time permanent position, and that staff proceed to include funding for this position within the 2024 operating budget under the finance division of the corporate services department. Can I have a motion, please? Deputy Mayor, seconded by Councillor McIntosh. Any last questions or comments on this one? All in favor? And that one carried unanimously. Next, we have 12.1.5. The recommendation is that report CPS 2023-91 service level change, permanent full-time supervisor, licensing and bylaw enforcement be received, and that subject to the approval of the 2024 budget, staff be directed to convert the existing contract supervisor licensing and bylaw enforcement role into a permanent position, and that staff proceed to incorporate these costs within the draft 2024 operating budget under corporate services clerk's budget. Can I have a motion, please? Councillor Sherwood and Councillor Stevens. Questions or comments on this one? All in favor? And that one's carried unanimously. Next, we will move to 12.1.6. The recommendation is that report INS 2023-81 service level change permanent full-time fleet supervisor be received, and that subject to the approval of the 2024 budget, staff be directed to create a new full-time permanent position of fleet supervisor, and that staff proceed to include funding for this position within the 2024 operating budget under the Public Works Division of the Infrastructure Services Department. Can I have a motion, please? Councillor Sherwood and Councillor McIntosh. Questions or comments? All in favor? And that one's carried unanimously. Recommendation 12.1.7, that report INS 2023-82 service level change permanent full-time project manager for roads be received, and that subject to the approval of the 2024 budget, staff be directed to create a new permanent full-time position of project manager roads, and that staff proceed to include funding for this position within the 2024 operating budget under the Capital Works Division of Infrastructure Services. Can I have a motion, please? Deputy Mayor and Councillor Prendergast. Questions, comments? Seeing none, all in favor? And that one's carried unanimously. 12.1.8, the recommendation is that report INS 2023-83 service level change waterworks operator be received, and that subject to the approval of the 2024 budget, staff be directed to create a new permanent full-time position of waterworks operator, and that staff proceed to include funding for this position within the 2024 operating budget under the Water Division of the Infrastructure Services budget. Can I have a motion, please? Councillor Sherwood and Deputy Mayor. Questions or comments? Councillor Stevens.
Sorry, I should have asked earlier. Through your worship, this person will be all fully licensed and trained and ready to go.
Mr. Koslak.
Through your worship, all our operators are licensed and trained for the waterworks. And actually, we've had very good luck on hiring operators when we do have vacancies. I think people have said it, Orangeville is becoming more of an employer of choice with all the changes in region of Peel and different areas. I think Orangeville is more and more in demand, so I don't expect an issue with hiring somebody.
Thank you, Mr. Koslak.
Thank you.
Anything else, Councillor Stevens? That was good. Any additional questions? All in favor? And that one is carried unanimously. We have no correspondence and no committee board minutes, so that takes us to the final staff report under 13, which is the 2024 consolidated budget. At this time, the recommendation is that Council approve the 2024 consolidated budget as presented in the 2024 budget report in the amount of $41,695,885 net of assessment growth, and that council approve the 2024 user fee funded budgets for building, water and wastewater as presented, and that council endorse the multi-year operating forecast from 2024 to 2028 as presented. Can I have a motion? Councillor Sherwood and Councillor McIntosh. Questions or comments on this item? Any other questions or comments? I want to make just one comment before we take the vote. In my history on council, this is probably the quickest that we've moved through a budget, and I want to commend staff for that, because when I opened up the budget for the very first time, I went through it and went, huh, like there's nothing in here that's jumping out to me as being out of the ordinary, a red flag. I mean, of course, we never like to pass a budget as high as 4.5%. The economy that we're in has dictated it, and past things that we need to fix, and I get that. But when I went through line by line and really started to read the budget, there was nothing in there that jumped out at me, and that is a direct reflection of the fact that our CAO, our treasurer, and our treasury team, our finance team, all of our general managers and our managers are all working diligently to meet council's expectations of strategic initiatives to make sure that our residents' needs are being taken care of and that everything that's important to us is being included. And I know it may seem like 4.5 is a tough pill to swallow, but I know that we're setting ourselves up for success in the future. I'm very confident passing this budget, and I know that when we first talked about the number, I was a little leery. But again, once I opened it and really read it, there was nothing in there that I could feasibly look at removing without really deeply impacting something. So that's a testament to staff, and I just wanted to thank you for that before I call the vote. Was there anything else that anybody wanted to say on that? Yeah, Councillor Sherwood.
Yes, Your Worship. So I too struggled when I first saw the recommendation of 4.5. I ran on a platform to try and, hold the line on tax increases. However, as the mayor has mentioned, this was a lean, clean budget, and it was really hard to go and turn around and say, what do we need to get rid of, and what services can be cut to get that down, other than me wanting to not buy table and chairs at the train station. Frivolous, right? But I'm just saying, the point is, it is really hard, and it is going to be a struggle for some people to have a 4.5% increase. But I want to thank staff so much for bringing a very conservative, lean budget to the point where you can't sit here and say, no, I don't want you to have this and I don't want that. We're going to provide adequate and really good service to our community, and that's what they deserve.
Thank you, Councillor Sherwood. Any other comments? I will call the vote then. All in favor? And the budget has carried unanimously. There are no notices of motion prior to the meeting. Is there any notices of motion tonight that anybody would like to provide? Mr. Smith, do you have something to say? Okay. Okay, perfect. None? Okay. We're at the appropriate time. We're at announcements, and I'll let you have the first announcement.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mayor Post. I appreciate that. And I wanted to comment and express my thanks to all members of council. At around the main table here, with the exception of our clerk, we all have less than a year. I think Tim may be close to that, something like that experience. So we're all new to the organization, and our relationship with you is forming. And tonight was a vote of confidence in your trust and faith in us. And we will work hard every single day to ensure that that trust and faith is kept, both with council and the community. Your acknowledgement of the need for staff will resonate very, very well with our staff team. We've talked a few times tonight and other times about building an organization that is a place where people want to work. And when municipal staff see council supporting reasonable requests, it becomes a destination. And I think we are a destination. So thanks very much, Mayor Post, for your leadership, and to each member of council for your support tonight.
Thank you very much, CAO Smith. Appreciate that. Was there any other announcements that anybody had tonight? I know we did a good round of announcements yesterday. The only one announcement that I'd like to make is tomorrow Family Transition Place is doing their annual Day of Remembrance, starting at 11:30 in their parking lot outside at the Family Transition Place building on Breeden Parkway. They do that annually on the 6th as a remembrance of the École Polytechnique massacre that happened in 1989. So we will all be gathering there if any of the public wishes to join. The ceremony or service does start at 11:30. I have no other announcements. Does anybody else have any? No. Our next council meeting is on Monday. We will see everybody then. The last thing is just our bylaws. There's a recommendation that the bylaws listed below be read 3 times and finally passed. It's a confirmatory bylaw to confirm the proceedings of the Council of the Corporation of the Town of Orangeville at its operating budget meeting held today, December 5th. Can I have a motion for the bylaws? Councillor Andrews and Deputy Mayor. Questions, comments? All in favor? And that's carried unanimously. And a motion to adjourn. Councillor Stevens and Councillor McIntosh. All in favor? Carried unanimously. Thank you very much, everyone. Have a wonderful evening.